Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to help you cut through the noise, get past that information overload, and find those strategic insights. Today, we're tackling a pretty big myth in the professional world, maybe one of the biggest. We've often been taught that real influence, it requires that outward show, the bravado, the self-promotion, being visibly in control.
Right, the strong leader archetype.
Exactly. But what if that whole posture, what if it's actually what's holding you back? What if it limits your long-term impact?
Yeah.
So our mission today is to dive into some sources that argue humility isn't just some, soft, nice-to-have virtue.
Not at all.
They argue it's a powerful strategic differentiator. It's the secret strength, maybe, that great leaders really leverage.
And it forces us, I think, to face a slightly uncomfortable truth about leadership itself. Most professionals, they don't really lose their impact because they lack skill or ambition. They often lose it because pride, it subtly twists their decisions. That constant need to prove themselves, to control every little outcome, or, to be seen as completely indispensable.
That's the killer.
That's what fractures teams. And, maybe even more importantly, it clouds your own internal judgment. You can't see clearly.
That's the paradox right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sources we looked at, they asked this really provocative question. What if the biggest threat to your leadership isn't some, external force or even failing at something? What if it's success?
Success itself. Wow.
Yeah. The moment success starts feeding that ego, that's maybe the moment you become blind. Blind to your own flaws, blind to where you actually need to grow next.
And that blindness, it's becoming, riskier because the whole environment is changing. Authority structures, they're flattening out everywhere.
You see that a lot now. Teams today, they're not really looking for that old school dictatorial figurehead.
Yeah.
They expect authenticity. They want grounded confidence. Real influence is shifting. It's flowing towards leaders who can genuinely listen, who adapt quickly, and who understand their power isn't rooted in dominance, but actually in their security. We're talking about humility that's like anchored deep in your identity, not just putting on a show,
Yeah.
Not optics.
Okay, right. So let's unpack the foundation then, this humble edge concept. Because to really get why it works strategically, we probably need to understand its source code, so to speak. And our material takes us straight to this idea of cosmic humility, the self-emptying nature of Christ.
Yeah, and this is where the biblical model just completely flips the script on worldly power structures. It really does. We look at that incredible passage in Philippians chapter 2. It just shatters that illusion of the self-made leader.
Well, it presents the ultimate paradox, right? You have Christ, who, being in very nature God, didn't see that equality as something to be, grasped onto or exploited for his own gain.
Okay.
Instead, he consciously, deliberately surrendered that advantage. He made himself nothing. The Greek word is kenosis. He emptied himself. He took on the form of a servant, a doulos, a slave, really, and became obedient even to the point of a pretty humiliating public death.
Right. That idea of self-emptying, voluntarily giving up status you're entitled to, that sounds like, weakness to the typical hard-charging executives, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It flies in the face of everything we're usually taught about getting ahead.
So how do the sources square that tension between humility and, decisive leadership? You still have to lead.
They define humility not as weakness, but as power under submission. It's about intentionally aligning your personal will, your power, to a greater purpose. It involves dependence on something beyond yourself. And paradoxically, that dependence actually unlocks greater internal strength. The key insight isn't, I should think less of myself. It's not about low self-esteem.
Right.
It's about thinking of yourself less, shifting the focus off yourself and onto the mission, onto others.
That distinction is so important, isn't it? Because it brings it right back to you, the listener. If you can anchor your humility in a really secure identity, in this case, the sources point to identity in Christ, that frees you up.
Totally.
It lets you step off that exhausting treadmill of always performing, always seeking external validation, always trying to prove your worth. Because your worth is already established somewhere else.
Exactly. That security is the strategic antidote, really, to that deep insecurity that fuels so much professional pride.
Okay, so let's pull this out of maybe the theological realm for a second and put it right into the office, the organizational reality. What happens when pride is driving versus when humility is leading? What are the visible results?
Oh, the contrast is stark, really stark. Pride-driven leadership. It creates this illusion of self-sufficiency. I've got this. I don't need anyone.
The hero complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that inevitably leads to the leader becoming a huge bottleneck. They can't delegate properly because deep down they fear failure, or they just don't trust others to meet their often arbitrary standards.
Sounds familiar.
Right. And this, it stifles creativity across the board. It leads to massive credit grabbing for any success. And ultimately, the whole system becomes fragile because it depends entirely on one flawed, usually overburdened person.
It just sounds exhausting and, frankly, really inefficient.
It absolutely is. Now, humility, on the other hand, does the opposite. Humility-driven leadership, it actually enhances influence over time. It promotes real innovation because people feel safe to contribute their ideas, even challenge the status quo.
Because their input is actually valued.
Exactly. And it builds highly resilient teams because the leader is freed from what the sources call the tyranny of self-preservation. When you don't have to spend all your energy protecting your image or your status,
You can actually focus on the work.
you can invest it in the mission. You can invest it in your people.
And we see this pattern again and again in those biblical examples, don't we? These figures who led huge, seemingly impossible projects, often only after they were kind of broken of their own self-reliance.
Precisely. Take Moses. Classic example. The sources point out that later in his life, he's described as more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth.
Incredible description.
It is. But look at his early life. His first attempt at leadership. Killing the Egyptian. That was pure self-reliant ambition.
Yeah.
Trying to fix God's problems with his own human strength and timing.
And it backfired spectacularly.
Massively. Led to 40 years in exile. Basically tending sheep in obscurity.
That desert time must have been the humbling forge, right? Stripping away that ego?
Absolutely. It had to be. Because his later leadership, after the wilderness, it wasn't defined by his assertion, but by his intercession, constantly advocating for the people before God. And maybe most relevant for us strategically, his humble willingness to actually delegate. Remember when his father-in-law, Jethro, shows up?
Yeah, the organizational consultant.
Pretty much. Jethro sees Moses burning himself out, trying to judge every single dispute personally, and Jethro just gives him straight advice. You need to restructure, delegate authority.
And Moses listened.
He listened. The guy leading millions took organizational feedback from his father-in-law and implemented it immediately.
Ugh.
He wasn't afraid to say, okay, I need help here. This system isn't working.
Wow. That's a real challenge for any executive today, isn't it? How many of us, if we're honest, have a Jethro we actually listen to instead of just nodding politely?
It's a tough one. And then you've got Nehemiah leading this massive, incredibly dangerous project, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem under threat.
Yeah, talk about pressure.
His leadership was just a masterclass in dependence. He modeled it by making prayer his starting point for literally every strategic move, even before going to the king for resources. Prayer first.
And that self-sacrifice piece, that wasn't just symbolic, was it? I remember reading about that.
No, not at all. It was very tangible. He famously refused to take the governor's food allowance, the perks of his position, for 12 years.
12 years, wow.
Yeah. He wanted to ensure he wasn't burdening the people. He was financially and physically right there with them, struggling alongside them, even working on the wall himself. That's leading from below. That's the humble edge in action.
Okay, so the common thread here, Moses, Nehemiah, it's clear. They led through dependence on God's presence, God's power, not just their own charisma or force of will.
Right. Charisma can be inspiring, sure, but it's often fragile. It might get you followers for a little while, but only character rooted in this secure, dependent humility that sustains influence for the long haul, for a lifetime, really.
This all sounds great in principle. It really does. But, the daily grind, the competitive pressure at work, it often just pushes us back into that default mode of prideful control. It's hard to resist.
Oh, it is. It's countercultural.
So how do we actually translate this profound wisdom into daily, intentional reality? Because humility isn't automatic. It must be like a discipline requiring actual practice, right?
It absolutely requires intention, constant intention. And it really starts with an honest, ongoing evaluation of your motives. Just pausing before a meeting, before making a key decision and asking, okay, why am I doing this? Am I trying to serve the goal here, or am I trying to impress someone? Am I trying to advance the mission, or just advance my own status?
That self-awareness check.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get really practical. What are the actionable strategies the sources recommend for actually cultivating this?
Okay, first one, and this is often the hardest, seeking honest counsel. And that means actively inviting criticism, not just fishing for praise. From trusted peers, sure. Mentors, definitely. But most crucially, from the people you lead. A genuinely humble leader creates real psychological safety. Your team needs to know they can tell you you're wrong, or that an idea needs work, without fear of payback.
That's the key, isn't it? Not just asking for input, but proving you won't punish honesty.
Exactly. Because that's where most prideful leaders fail. They say they want feedback, but their reaction tells a different story. People learn quickly not to speak up.
Okay, so honest counsel. What's next?
Second is consistently acknowledging God's hand. Or, if that language doesn't resonate, acknowledging forces beyond your own effort. Leaders need to attribute success and provision properly, shifting the mindset from "I own this" to "I'm stewarding this."
Ownership versus stewardship, that's a big shift.
It's huge. Pride says, "Look what I built, look what I achieved." Humility says, "Wow, I was given the resources, the team, the opportunity to steward this outcome." It keeps the ego in check, prevents it from inflating with every win, and keeps the focus outward.
Right. And what about that tricky thing, false humility, the kind that actually draws attention to itself?
Yeah, we have to actively avoid false humility, genuine humility.
Yeah.
It's authentic, it's secure, it's focused on the mission. The counterfeit version, that false humility, it often uses self-deprecating remarks, but the goal is actually to manipulate perception. Maybe fish for compliments.
Oh, it's nothing.
Where?
When you secretly want praise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It still looks like modesty on the surface, but underneath, it's still serving the ego. It's just another performance.
Got it. So to make this intentional, make it stick, our sources actually offer a specific tool, a practical way to track this internal shift. It's called the weekly humility log. This is about creating a deliberate rhythm, right? A weekly practice of just noticing.
Yeah, think of it like an internal audit, a quick check-in. The purpose of the log is simply to jot down concrete moments during the week when you consciously chose, say, service over status, or dependence over control. It makes the spiritual discipline tangible, visible to yourself.
Okay, give us an example. What would be a valuable entry? What should you, the listener, actually be tracking?
Well, a really powerful entry might be recording an act of dependence on God. Maybe you faced a really high-stakes conflict, a tough negotiation, and instead of just defaulting to your positional authority, you intentionally paused. Maybe you prayed for wisdom or actively sought collaboration instead of imposing your will. You track that moment of surrendering control.
Okay, tracking the surrender. What else?
Another key type of entry is a moment of humbling or receiving feedback. So, for instance, maybe you record admitting a significant mistake to your team openly. Or maybe you detail a time when you changed a key decision entirely because of input from a subordinate, even when your gut or, frankly, your ego was pushing back hard.
So you're tracking the moments where self-preservation lost.
Exactly. You're tracking the death of that need to always be right, always be in control.
And by keeping that log, even briefly each week, you start to really see and hopefully solidify that multiplier effect of the humble edge. Because humility, it doesn't diminish your leadership, does it? The sources say it amplifies it.
It absolutely amplifies influence. How? Well, it builds deep trust because vulnerability is required for humility. And vulnerability builds trust. It fosters radical collaboration because you genuinely value diverse input when you're humble. And it enhances organizational resilience because you frame failure not as a personal disaster, but as crucial learning. The humble leader is the ultimate learner in the organization.
So thinking about the current moment, leadership is being redefined everywhere. Organizational change is constant. The question really becomes, can you afford not to lead with this posture? Can you afford to lead without humility, the one thing that actually multiplies influence instead of just competing for it? That's the strategic challenge, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And maybe here's a final provocative thought for you to take into your week, something the sources suggest. When you truly lead from this place of dependence, that exhausting burden, the need to always perform, always prove yourself, always control everything, it starts to lift. And it gets replaced by something quite different, real freedom, and even, dare I say, joy in leading, because you're leading from a place of secure identity, not constant striving.
So think about your role this week, your responsibilities. What's the one area of control? Maybe it's a specific project, maybe a difficult relationship, maybe an outcome you're worried about. What's one thing you could intentionally surrender to God, to others this week, just to experience a little bit of that freedom? Go find your humble edge.